Yeah, making a video. Hythloday video. They're actually just cutting trees and the chippers were going and all that crap. So it was kind of fortuitous. Yes, we have the nice little sunny spot here with the pond and such. I am liking it back here. Ooh, a water beetle. There we go, we have activity. Ooh, yes. Something to film later, maybe. Water beetle swimming or something. Anyway, I won't waste your time. Let's get to the subject. So we brought up ethics. Hythloday did again. And he's one of these Kantian guys. And Kantian ethics is basically, oh gee, try your best. you know, some kind of vague, like, oh, okay, well, if you think you're being a good person, that's all that matters. Is whatever delusion you have in your head. About what a wonderful person you are, because, okay, you didn't do it perfectly, but you tried not to poison everybody at the party with your bad cooking, so it's okay if you poison them, because, you made a minor effort. You were totally unskilled. Well, anyway, I'm just making, I'm mocking Kantian ethics, because, I think that's just rubbish. I think you're required to do something a little harder. You got to be a little more. It's a little more complicated than that, and it's certainly more complicated when you start getting into the vagaries of human judgment and just say that all humans have equal opinions or something. That would be, just on its face, a non-starter. So we know there's people who are delusional. We know that if you know they're delusional, you'd have a responsibility to protect them from their delusions. So where does that go? So then we just start talking about who's really competent, and say that ethics now has something to do with competency, and I think that's a more rational conversation to have, is the recognizing that that's all this is really. Rights are about responsibility, and responsibility is a consequence of understanding. If you understand something, then you're responsible in the sense that you're blamable. And likewise, having intelligence is likely to make you more responsible. So, I think it essentially qualifies you. So, I mean, you could go, as I wrote it on my notes anyway, rights, responsibility, qualification, then you got power, and then you got influence and imposition. And you can just kind of connect the dots between these words and recognize that ethics is about, first there's the question of what you do for somebody who is incompetent, protecting them from their own judgment. But there's also the question of what is the substance of your influence. I mean, say if I was incompetent as a fireman, that's a different kind of incompetence than incompetence as a life manager or something, or somebody who's going to do something somebody who's more, something frivolous versus something urgent, something immediate versus something where you have plenty of time to think. You have different expectations in these different circumstances for success and failure. Technically, you're allowed to fail a little bit. Okay, if you show up if you're driving down the road and there's a terrible car accident, you run into the fire and the smoke and all that stuff, and you hear a baby, and you fight through the fire, and you grab the bundle, and the bundle's a bundle of potatoes. So you failed. Okay, the baby burned to death, and you got a bunch of potatoes. So it's not like you committed an ethical crime for that failure, because it's an emergency. And you're sacrificing some piece of yourself for this circumstance. So the expectations can be lower, and the risk of you causing harm is almost zero. So you can't really fail, because all you can do is improve a circumstance. So the ethical requirements are completely different than if you are, say you're two people living on an island, and one guy says, I want to have a nuclear power plant, and the other guy is hysterical, like, why the fuck are you doing this? You're going to fucking irradiate me? And what are you going to do with the electricity? And the guy says, well, I have a bubble machine. I want to run the bubble machine. I like watching the bubbles. So there's a almost a negligible value for a preposterous risk, and the risk is imposed on somebody else. And let's say the risk is almost imposed on them exclusively in the sense that the wind only blows in one direction and it's all in the direction of the other guy's property. So, these are all different standards for, you're going to have very different standards for how good the judgment has to be, depending on how bad the potential failure is, and for what cause, how necessary the cause is. So you have the cause of an action, the thing you're doing it for, the proposed good to be accomplished, and you have the weight of the risk that's going to be imposed, and the weight or value of whatever consent you have to impose that risk versus the and also the distribution of the risk. Is the risk entirely somebody else's risk? And are you completely almost immune to the weight of the risk? These are the things you use to value, to determine the ethical constraints and the ethical responsibilities and the ethical standards. So I think this Kantian crap of saying I'll just pretend whatever delusion is in my head of being a gift giver justifies me, giving somebody a tax bill as a gift, or, whatever you wanted. Universal health care. Oh, I'll give it to you as a gift. You subsidize my health care, even though you don't want health care. That kind of thing. Like, I'm doing you a favor, okay, by having you finance my subjective desires. Publicly financed sports or something might be an example. There's no ethics to this. This is just a theft of people's money to subsidize the special interest of a minority, which is bullshit. Anyway, and it doesn't really matter majority or majorities. Popularity of something doesn't justify it innately, especially if it's a bubble machine, and the risk you're imposing on some minority is egregious. So I could bring up like the lack of ethics there is to the cigarette tax, for example. Taxing an addictive substance, even if you were doing it for their own benefit, would be a little bit grotesque as a treatment or a therapy. It's pretty obscenely brutal way to cure their disease. Obviously, though, it has written all over it that it's completely usury. It's completely a majority just saying we're just going to steal the minority's money. There's absolutely almost no veil of pretense of good intentions in any of this crap because of the way the money's used, and the fact that it seems quite obvious the money is just being used to replace the tax cuts given to the richest people in the world. And so they're taxing some of the poorest people in the world to finance the yachts of the richest people in the world. And that's all it is. It's completely unethical by Kantian standards, but some Kantians might say, well, yeah, you could just use deceptive rhetoric. You could just pretend you're doing it for the children. Where if you wanted to protect children, you would just regulate tobacco, require people who smoke to get a prescription, and then you've solved the childhood threat. And so this is, because no one's going to pay the street price for cigarettes as a controlled substance, because you don't get high. It's nicotine. It's not fucking heroin. Well, anyway, I'm just saying that you could fix the problem of cigarette smokers for the future generations in simple ways, and they've chose the non-simple way, and quite obviously they've chosen the non-simple way because it's a convenient way of disguising bad intentions, and the bad intention is just to steal money. But it's veiled with a good intention of, oh, we're doing it for the children. So it's just a lie. So I'm just saying this is where Kantian ethics just fails all over the place, is you can veil almost any activity in some sort of lie, some sort of deception, even when it's a convenient lie. One that it's not a malicious, even when the lies aren't malicious, but they're just convenient because, oh yeah, that plan sounds so much better because I win in that one, right? I don't have to jump on a grenade. And so the guy goes for it just because it has this obvious advantage, and he doesn't really give it any thought or do any real hard work. So anyway, so you know, Hythloday, you know, he slanders me in his video, which is, you know, just rude. But you know, this little trite, like somehow I have only arbitrary reasons for making distinctions between one person's philosophy and another, and the reasons aren't arbitrary. I'm not saying that blue people should be listened to and red people shouldn't be listened to. You know, I'm saying let's, you know, you can build tests for these things logically, and there's standards. We know when somebody's competent to drive. We can figure out how to test their skill. You know, we can test veracity and honesty of people based on past performance. You know, there's lots of ways to glean the depth of and character of a person's argumentation, and to say that I'm proposing some arbitrary standard is a lie. I haven't proposed any arbitrary standards. I've proposed very concrete standards, and I've said let's make them as relevant to a real qualification as possible. So I'm not advocating for anything. I'm not advocating for any cheat. I'm saying even if you had to spend resources to do this, even if we had to violate each other's privacy a little bit, that this would be worth knowing who's a credible human being and who's not. So fuck you. That's just a bullshit. All right. So he uses rhetoric though, like table of reason. That you know, everybody has this entitlement to come to the table and have an opinion on whether we should, let's say, so there's 10 people on the island, they all should get to go to the table of reason to have a conversation about whether we should have nuclear power. And he's saying that everybody should have the same vote. So the guys who have spent years studying nuclear power and the guy who understands it, you know, their votes should be as the same vote as the people who are like, does nuclear start with an N? You know, who know nothing about it. You know, they heard an Alex Jones video. That's the extent of their knowledge on the subject. And he's saying, oh yeah, well, at the Kantian table of reason, yeah, we have to give everybody the same vote. So even if they're completely unqualified to voice an opinion, yeah, give them a vote anyway. You might as well just give 5-year-olds votes then. You might as well just say, you're the one being arbitrary now. You're the one saying, yeah, the standard is arbitrary. You walked to the table. You were able to walk to the table and you know some English words. Now you have a vote. That would be, in my opinion, just corrosive to reason, corrosive to anything called getting the right answer or doing the right thing. So in my opinion, that's got to be unethical, because you're allowing the qualified bus driver not to be sitting in the bus driver's seat. Right? Let's say we're all riding on a bus and we're going to decide who should drive the bus. And there's complete imbeciles on the bus who are just saying, I should drive the bus because I have bus driver shoes on. You know. Anyway, so again, the real game is these situations where you're affecting other people and when you're not affecting other people. But I'd still argue that for a utilitarian or for somebody who values the very function of the human being, that claims and understands that value is actually created inside of sentient beings, that you still have a responsibility even when it's not your value system. When you understand that there's no difference between one sentient being and another sentient being and another sentient being in terms of the fact that they're all value creators, and that the only difference is one might be creating 70 value and one might be creating 80 value and one might be 90. You know, that they might have different levels of value or something, but that they're all value creators, generators, and that any value you preserve, any harm you prevent is good harm prevented. Once you understand that, there's no point in talking about whether it's your pain or their pain. It's pain, and you have a theory of pain, and you want to apply the best theory of pain. You don't presume that the individual who's the possessor of the pain machine is qualified to know what's in their interest. Just like when a kid has a tantrum because they fell down, and because somebody said, "Oh, are you all right?" and worries, they think they now have an excuse to have a total tantrum panic, even though they feel no pain, they have no injury. But because somebody gave them the idea that they can now get attention by having a panic, they have a panic. And so if somebody's hysterical about some idiotic adventure they need to go, I need to climb the mountain, I need to climb the mountain, I need to climb the mountain. And you know the guy doesn't know what he's fucking goddamn doing. Yeah, you rationally say, let's stop that, because this guy's just going to create misery. You know, it's like somebody trying to catapult themselves to the moon. You just say, no, forget it. Why do you want to go to the moon? There's no oxygen there, retard. Even if you could catapult yourself to the moon, you're going to die. And besides that, you're not going to succeed, so you're doomed to fail. You're doomed just to create harm in yourself. It's stupid. It's idiotic. Yes, you're going to stop them. All right. So equality is just a... You don't have equal... Again, it's qualifications. You want somebody who knows how to drive buses, who has experience, who's qualified to be driving a bus. You don't want equality. You want to just sit there and go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and decide who drives the bus. So I think it's silly to talk about equality. And it's more rational conversation is how do we qualify opinions? How do we qualify judgment among ourselves? I mean, we should have some agreeable standards that a person is more qualified when they have done some study, have some knowledge of basic earth sciences or mathematics, have some basic constituent of understanding in terms of understanding the difference between their psychology and their philosophy. And I think they're... Oh, that's a tree. I gotta cut that fucker. I'll get somebody to cut it. It's hanging on another tree, and it's very dicey. You know, it's right over the house, and I got to try to figure out how to get it to go the right way. And you got to get it to go the right way without it landing on yourself. You know, it doesn't sound good. There's just so many, there's a lot of problems there. Anyway, yeah, I'm sitting in a chair making a video. Probably not the best light either. Sorry about that. Didn't notice that happens here. But that's okay. Maybe I'll move my chair over to that side for a change now and then. I could do that now, actually. I'm not in the sun. I think I might like to be in the sun. I think maybe what I'll do is put another chair back here, because I do have plenty of chairs, actually. I think I have plenty. Well, I think I have chairs over there, so you have to always bring one of those chairs back over to here, and then I can replace this chair with that chair, and then I'll have another chair over there. So anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, the equality argument, I think, partly. So yeah, there's no point in talking about equality of opinions, because they aren't equal. And there's times where we have to concede to some sort of sense of equality, and we do that when it comes to democracy and stuff like that. But ideally, I think anyway, would rather a democracy that had some respect, that imposed some obligation on voters to at least read the bills, to at least know the people they're voting for, know more about them than whether they have, he has a lovely wife, or, he keeps his hair combed very nicely. If that's the best they can do, yeah, maybe their vote shouldn't quite be equal. And there's nothing unethical in recognizing the differences in qualifications, because there's something at stake here. Again, you're just, this all wouldn't matter if nothing was at stake, but something's at stake, and there's going to be a thing called success or failure. And ethics should give you a better chance of success than failure. That's really its job, is to prevent failure, to minimize the risk of failure, and to maximize the potential for the best gain or the best solution. There's no point in having ethics if that's not going to be your end game. It's like there's no point in having a justice system if the accomplishment isn't less rape and murder and harm and mayhem. Consent and deserve, I'll always come back to those words, and they're missing from so much of what goes on that you would call ethical. and that I certainly would say right there, you're out of the game. You're not going to be able to do this well enough. Nobody's a competent driver of the bus. All right, but anyway, standards of performance and qualifications, I'm just saying that we can develop those if people have the balls to admit that, religious fables are disqualifications, fantasy thinking, just nonsense, ignorant nonsense. All right, so I have the imperfect. So you can fail when it's an emergency, or you're taking nothing and giving something. You're sacrificing and you're risking very little worse outcome. Then you can fail. You can be imperfect. But if you're risking a bad outcome, the higher the risk, the more you have to be qualified. The more you have to be, the more, not the higher the risk, is probably the not the right way to say it. The more catastrophic potential failure is, no matter what its risk. Torture. Like I said, say with the nuclear power plant thing. Again, I could statistically demonstrate to my neighbor that, oh look, it's only a 1 in a million chance of what you're afraid of happening. The argument still is he can still draw a picture of the 1 in a million chance that is so horrible that you just can't risk it for a bubble machine. That's really the game, is who does the failure fall on, who pays for failure, and how big a price is failure. And I'd say those are things that give people veto votes. And so in this ethical argument about human existence, I'm saying the torture victims have a right to veto your silly bubble machine. First, there's nothing necessary about it. The value is completely a projection of value. You can demonstrate no negative effect, no burning baby that will be the consequence of you not having humans on planet Earth. There'll be no demonstrable harm, value degradation that'll take place in that scenario. And certainly it can be demonstrated that if you do this as badly as people can project you are capable of doing it and likely of doing it, that the harm will be hugely substantial. It will be non-consensual, and it will be imposed on victims which have, again, you're taking the gain, they're getting the pain. Completely unethical distribution of risk and harm. And so yeah, they have a veto right then. And I'm exercising my veto right. I'm vetoing your obnoxious plan to unethically take to get what you want. And that's the only way you can get what you want, is to take it from the victims who will pay for it. So I say it's unethical. And I say you're cheating that fundamental argument by playing these games about intentions and playing games with ambiguously described and defined. What fire are you racing to? Why can you justify imperfection in your action and high risk in your action? There's no baby that needs to be rescued here. You have no right to be imperfect. You have no right to pick up potatoes. You have no right to make a mistake. You have no right to do this civilization thing sloppily or recklessly. So if you're not even willing to exercise perfection in your activities, in your intent, if people aren't willing to do civilization in the most disciplined, conscientious, hard-working way, so again, we're back to the bird's nest thing. If they're not willing to build the nest, they have no right to lay the eggs. That's certainly, I'm saying they have no right to lay the eggs anyway because they didn't get the eggs' permission. But they certainly have no right to lay eggs in no nest. And so on those 2 points, your argument completely fails, and you're an unethical bastard. And I don't think you have any. Your Kantian crap is not going to save you from that simple, mathematical, logical analysis. Yeah. So, video is completed, I believe. I think it's a nice dissection of ethics and the importance of it, and blah, 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 blah. Its functionality, again, it only has function in a utilitarian sense. There's no point in having ethics if your ambition isn't not an improvement in the outcome. That's all there is outcomes, the future. That's all that really matters. And if you're not going to improve the outcome, then there's no point in having ethics. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you don't have an ambition of improvement. Intention. Yeah. So, anyway, you can see the deer's beneath this bamboo. But the bamboo is, he doesn't care. Deer could eat that all day long, I guess. These barberries are everywhere. Everywhere. Oh, I gotta cut them back. Anyway, that's just minor inconvenience. No real problem. Not a very nice morning. It might rain later, but it's pretty perfect right now. Except for the chipper. Yeah, it's just annoying. 2 days in a row. Well, it's not really 2 days in a row, but or whatever it is. I saw 4 snakes in the last 5 days. That's kind of unusual. 4 snakes in 5 days. Yeah, a couple of big ones. So, it's interesting. But anyway, until next time.